Okay, well, welcome everyone. We'll get started now. I think we have got a quorum on the phone here, which is great. We've got about 24 people on the line. And welcome to our Friday coffee clutch of the Let's Get Technical group. And very excited about today's call. And we've prepared an agenda here to help us kind of sort through some things here. So let me just proceed with that. Okay, so on today's agenda, and hopefully folks are at a computer. If not, I'll read some of the stuff out so you can kind of hear it. We wanted to accomplish a couple of things. I know in the prior calls we have been diving pretty deeply into some technical conversations pretty rapidly. And so that's been very gratifying and very both interesting and really very much in the core and addressing the goals of this group. So we wanted to pull back a little bit today and have the conversation that has been on the agenda, but we haven't actually gotten to it too much in the prior number of calls. And just to spend a little time on a couple of things. One is the sort of going forward, sort of the agenda, structure, and content of how these meetings are proceeding, and then also sort of more specific on governance discussions, and that and how do we want the groups to go forward. And then we'll reserve a chunk of time to hear from some folks who have been engaged just this last week on a number of really interesting conferences that all were scheduled literally at the same week. So there's the National Information Exchange Model. That was actually the week before. The Strategic Health Information Exchange Conference that will also occur in Baltimore. The Office National Coordinator call that was in Baltimore, and then the Medicaid Enterprise Services Conference. So I know a number of people. It'll be interesting to hear how many folks who were actually on or participated in those events who are actually on the call now, since they all sort of also triangulate to many of the topics that we have interest in talking about here. So we'll have some of that conversation. And we'll go through some of the slides more specifically, and hopefully that will be helpful. You know, one of the things as I start off here again talking about is this is a sort of community of networks, and what we're looking for, what we're trying to encourage and support and facilitate is in many ways a self-managing organization here. So while we're providing the infrastructure and the support for it and the convening, we are encouraging folks to step forward and participate, both in leading and moderating, supporting and planning it. And so the more we can do with that, I think the more we'll fulfill not only the mission, but also create more sustainability for this kind of activity. And I know that from just my conversations this last week in Chicago at the MESC conference, there seems to be a lot of heart for that, especially from other communities of people wanting to get into this conversation and have a place to be able to accomplish the goals of what we've established for the National Interoperability Collaborative. And I'll just briefly go through that a little bit. I know there's some new people on the phone here. So what we typically do is we open the floor for some brief introductions for new people who are on the call here. There's been a recurring participant group that has come back every week, and that's been terrific. And there's also been new people who've popped into the calls and have been contributing thoughts and content. So what we do is we just spend a few minutes going down the list basically of who's on the call and kind of where you come from and what your area of interest is. Again, it meant to be brief, but let's hear from people who are on the call. And then what we'll do is I just have just two quick slides of the NIC, just to give a very brief overview for some new people on here, just to put it in context. I've already mentioned a few things. and we'll do a quick update on our first project, which is on person matching, a simple, get it done quickly kind of a project, basically, and that there is a group that has been starting to work on it, and we focused on the initial work last week. We'll just do a quick update on that, and then if there's any other old business, and then we'll dive into the topic. So I'm hoping to spend maybe about 15 minutes or so on the welcome and intro, that first section, and then divide the time between the conversation topics and then the overview of the conferences here. So the way we've done this in the past is if you see the, it's hard to call people out because some people only have, I kind of only see part of their names here. But on your list, if you have a list of people either through the participant list or off to the right, if you would just start up and feel free to join in, say a few things, and also part of this is because we're doing this online, sometimes there are sort of awkward moments of speaking over one another, but that's fine. Just kind of pause for a moment, see if anyone takes the space, and not just go ahead and jump in. And it seems to have worked pretty effectively. So
yeah, and just to clarify, this is Adam. Just new folks, please, because if we all identify ourselves again, that'll be the end of the meeting.
Great. So who would like to start? Okay, there is a Bannisterm I see on here, but I don't know who that is. So go ahead if you need.
Yeah. So this is Mark Bannister. I'm from the state of Indiana, the Child Welfare Services Department, and happy to be here.
Oh, great! Thanks. Welcome. Who's up next? Any other new people?
Good morning. This is Daniel Buck, consulting with Stewards of Change. Background in health and human services and child welfare.
Welcome, Daniel. Welcome from the left coast. Appreciate it. Waking up early to get on the call.
Hi, this is Rita today from the Washington, D.C. area, and I have a background in health IT focused on interoperability and also consumer patient engagement.
Great. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Carmen Smiley. I'm an IT specialist in the Office of Technology at NIC. Also really excited to be here. I see lots of colleagues that I know of that we've worked together in some identity management or patient matching efforts in the past. Thanks.
Thank you, Carmen. Who else? New folks? Okay, so I guess everyone has introduced themselves previously. You can see if you're new to Zoom, there are navigation tools along the bottom, so you can see who the managing, who the participants are. You can make comments on the chat box off to the right side there, and we'll try to address those questions as they come up. I think there's a way to raise your hand if you have a question, or just simply chime in and jump into the conversation. All right, any comments? I'm just going to do a couple of quick slides on the National Interoperability Collaborative for the new folks here. So we talk about NIC as a community of networks, and it's designed to really increase collaboration within and across multiple domains. And that's really the operative words here. It's really across domains. And we've defined those domains, and it's not meant to be completely comprehensive, but it does cover a lot of territory, including social and human services, public health, public education, public safety, emergency medical services, and health information technology. There are a lot of different capabilities, specializations within each of those, And what we found over the years is that there's a lot of intersection amongst those, both within each domain, trying to share information more effectively, but also across those domains. And one of the things we're focused on is how do we help facilitate the conversation across domains, since so many of the really intransigent problems, especially related to social determinants and the like, are bound up with our ability to share information more effectively and with less friction. And so about a year and a half ago, we published a paper supported by HIMSS that really looks at these. So in this 6 domains paper, which is on the website, actually there's a link here, and we'll post this presentation to the NIC Hub as well, is a discussion of each of these areas and trying to articulate how they come to market. And so our goal over time is to be able to actually facilitate cross-domain conversations in some detail as we move forward, and we've started to do that. This work is supported by the Kresge Foundation, and we thank them quite a bit for helping support the development and then the ongoing nature of this for a little while here. Briefly, I'm not going to read through all these. What we do is bring people together. We help convene and facilitate discussions. We post and produce environmental scans research, and then focus on particular areas of great interest. We've developed a few chapters, one in the New England area, and we started to do that in California as well, and are interested in participating with both individual states or regions that have an interest in also on a more focused basis, bringing folks together. And then really at the core of our mission is to bring people together either in person through national or regional convenings, or through webinars or trainings, or exactly what we're doing here on the NIC today. And if you go to the National Interoperability Collaborative website, you'll find lots and lots of information about the work that we are doing and others who are on this call are involved with, have been involved with. And as well, you'll find a link to the collaboration hub itself. I'm imagining or hoping that all of you have signed up. I think we have about 200 members on the Let's Get Technical group now, somewhere in that order. So that's a substantial number of people who have actually indicated their interest in this. And over the last 8 weeks, we've had anywhere from 25 to 50 or 60 people on the calls interested in this topic. So what we're trying to do is continue to drive the conversations forward at a meaningful depth and the right content, and also be responsive to the quote-unquote community interests and your needs, and how do we form and orient this work in a way that's really meaningful and sustainable. Let me pause for a second and just ask Dave Walsh, who's the co-lead on this, as well as any of the other team members, if they have any other ideas or concepts they want to add to what I've just kind of opened up with.
Not at this point, Daniel. The one thing that I would add, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on in the discussion, is my background is in the healthcare domain, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the Medicaid Enterprise Systems Conference that a number of us went to. But my focus is really to try and take the activities that are going on in healthcare, and there's a lot of them when it comes to interoperability that are making progress at this point, and then look at how we can leverage those activities in the human services space. Some of those topics relate to what's happening in fire in the healthcare domain versus NEAM in the human services space. So my focus is really how do we leverage the activities in healthcare in the human services and get those interoperating better.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, I'm really excited to hear from others about what kind of, I know we don't have time to go into the in-depth on these large conferences, but just to get a flavor for the kind of conversations. I know there was a lot going on at the Medicaid conference around social determinants and integration and interoperability and those kinds of things. It's interesting, as the folks who are participating on the call here, if you think about what domain you're coming from, Dave, sort of declared that, he's really coming from the health IT side of things and the Medicaid world. As you make comments or think about it, we're really trying to encourage participation from the other domains. So if you have thoughts that, or questions or recommendations or ideas that, get prompted by the conversation or the ideas, please bring them forward and declare kind of where you're coming from, whether or not it's the education world or public safety world or social and human services or child welfare. It's been a big area of focus, and some of the use cases we've got are actually focused on that, or proposed use cases are focused on that. So great. Any other opening comments folks want to make or contribute to the conversation so far? Okay, so just briefly then, one of the first groups the first group we started up was what we've evolved it to calling it the person matching project team, as opposed to patient or client, and saying there's a lot of pieces in the interoperability continuum that are necessary in order to be able to share that kind of information on a regular basis. And these folks who are on the screen here have participated and have offered to continue to participate to work on really developing a template that we can use not only for person matching, but also as we go forward on other specific areas within the context of interoperability. And pardon me if I've left anyone off this list. I'm kind of coordinating between different lists here. So if you're not on the list, please speak up, wave your hand, or say something right now. So we want to make sure we give credit to folks who have contributed to it. And so let me just pause for a second, see if anyone. All right, I think I've gotten everyone then. Great. So, the idea of this is, if we step back for a second from a collaboration perspective, it's one thing to do a webinar online and present materials and subject matter experts and do some Q&A, which is really valuable, and we've done a bunch of those on within other groups, whether it's the opioid group or the social determinant group, and those are great and valuable. But they tend to be sort of more one-way conversations. What we're attempting to do here on Let's Get Technical in many ways is sort of embody that whole area of sort of a self-managing group and project teams that are committing a certain amount of time to do some work and contribute to the collaborative and encourage that. So this is our first group, and we are hoping that over time we will be able to add more voices and more groups to the initiative here. And what I want to do is, this is essentially the first template draft with a few modifications that we put together. Actually, Pradeep took the first crack at it, and kudos and applause to Pradeep for actually sort of diving in and being willing to put his thoughts out on the table. We had a robust conversation last week about what goes into this, how it might look, and those notes are captured and they are on the NIC hub on the Let's Get Technical under the project. If you look on the menu bar, and you'll see project, and you'll see that this material is posted up there. So Pradeep, let me turn it over to you for just a second, and I know that you've had a little time to think about it since we've been there. Maybe just a few reflections on kind of what you're thinking about relative to defining the enablers and inhibitors for domain personship matching.
Sure. Thank you very much, Daniel. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. A few things that I have been thinking is about how is this patient matching or person matching being implemented in different domains, and what are some of the approaches that are most often used within each of these domains? Is it mostly reliant on clear text or probabilistic matching or utilization of the referential matching? So what exactly is it that is most often used within these specific domains, or are there any commonalities? That's something that I'm really trying to look for, and also trying to identify what are the metrics. I mean, there are many evaluation metrics when it comes to patient matching. So what are some of the metrics and how do they overlap within these domains? And trying to identify some use cases. So that's what I have been reflecting upon based on this matrix that was developed.
Thanks, Pradeep.
Thank you, Daniel.
So this group, folks I mentioned, have committed to getting together next week and doing another level of refinement on this, starting to fill it in a bit more and starting to identify references to see how relevant this is for us as a way to think about person matching and the like. One of the things I'll point out is, and one of the things I think we evolved from last week was that each of these columns will be theoretically very relevant in different ways to each of the different be very relevant for each of the different domains, right? So you have human services, healthcare, IT, the 6 domains we had talked about. We should be looking at the actual response to each of those, because they may very well be different. And then the other part of this was to look at it on a sort of a 6x6 matrix, so to put each of the domains across the rows and across the columns and across the rows, and then picking some of the key points, whether or not it's the metrics or use cases or references, and to see where they overlap and where they're consistent or inconsistent. So that becomes a very useful tool as you're looking across to say, well, how does human services address some of these issues around person matching relative to healthcare, IT, or public health? And so that's at least the approach we will be pursuing. So others that may want to join that, Eric, I just saw your note on your chat, and be happy to add you to that. And I'll let you know, I'll send you the invite for the call time, which is, I think, next Wednesday. People are planning on getting together. I would encourage folks as well to go on to the Let's Get Technical project team and add commentary for your thoughts on what this template ought to look like and how it might be most effective. So any comments before we move on there?
And Daniel, this is Pradeep. So
yes.
I was also thinking about starting another document with common definitions that we come across, because we may not be able to add all the definitions in this 6x6 matrix. We may have to come up with some kind of a glossary with all the key terms and definitions that we come across during our individual or collective research.
That's a great way of thinking about it.
That would be another good outcome, or something that we can share as something that comes out of this collaborative.
Absolutely right. Great.
And I have started putting together some definitions as a part of my research, and I'll be happy to share that with the team. Whenever there is an opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Yes. I'll also mention that there's been a couple of resources identified recently. I don't know if they've come out of the recent conferences or not, but we'll share those around patient matching or person matching that I think are a good background for it. Many of them are sort of health and clinically oriented, but again, we don't want to start from the ground. We don't want to start if there's already work been done. And I think that's part of the value of this group, is to identify where those resources are currently, they've been developed, what are the right sources to be looking at, and that's the idea of having a domain expert in each of the domains who may be more prepared and have a broader view or deeper view of where the industry is headed. All right, so stay tuned. We'll be going into this person matching. We'll change the title of the template. I just noticed it still says patient or client matching here. But we'll be going into that as one of the topical areas for next week in some more detail as the group does its work. And so we're looking both at the process and the content of how we proceed. So with that, let me open up this next slide here. In terms of moving the conversation forward, relative to the meeting agenda and structure, So we'll talk a little bit about the sort of the meeting agenda structure and some governance topics, and then we'll move to an overview of the conferences and get into some more discussion on that. But I wanted to put up here a bit some thoughts around how are these meetings structured, and how can we best take advantage of the time that people are committing to it to make sure we're meeting both the needs and the interests of folks as broadly and as deeply as we can. And so this is just kind of a summarization, I guess, of some thoughts and some practices we've been doing. And let me just walk through this, and then I want to open up the conversation to see if there's alternative ideas, if this meets people's interest, if it's just fine, let's keep going, or if there's other suggestions on how to sort of innovate this. While the technology is helpful, being able to bring people together in this virtual format, I think there's a sort of new and different ways to engage people in discussions that I'm certainly not aware of all the best techniques here. So what we would do is open it up with sort of new and old business, updates, introductions, and just a brief overview of the NIC as appropriate if there's new people on the call here, just to get, just obviously to set the agenda for the day. And then there's sort of two major ways we can approach this. One is to have I'm referring to it as a short subject matter expert presentation that would be focused on a particular topic that we want to learn more about. I think one of the challenges that we have is we have, multiple domains. There's things that each of us and each of you rather are involved with that are second nature or core to your work, like TEFCA, for instance, on the health side, the ONC side. Whereas in the human services side, I don't think that it's very well developed yet, as well as in many other domains. The same way, there are other sort of significant policy or statutory or policy-related kinds of things that are really driving the agenda, as we'll see soon. Like on the child welfare side, there's the Families First Act that is changing the nature of child welfare tremendously, and that has a huge impact on what will be happening and the kind of data exchanges that will be needed. So we can talk more about that, but this idea of some subject matter expert presentations, and that wouldn't necessarily have to happen every week. That could rotate every other week. And perhaps the next point, which is we would have a project team report out. I know that all of you have, or allegedly all of you have day jobs, and carving out time to work on projects is not easy, and certainly, but important relative to accomplishing sort of collaborative goals that we think the NIC is sort of addressing for folks. So under that sort of the project report out might be either existing, a project like we're talking about with person matching, and some new teams, which we'll also talk about as we move forward a little bit. When we started this, we talked about both identity proofing and person matching. We decided to split those into two. What's the right time to start another group on that? There's a whole question around standards. There's a whole question around continuing on the needing to fire conversation we've had. And I know that there are many, many others that we can add into this in terms of what would make sense for us as we talk about interoperability, what enables that. And then another part might be, as I said earlier, as we develop more subject matter experts, or if we engage moderators to lead one of the domains, that might be also an interesting conversation, is to pose a question and then to structure a conversation around how do each of the domains or the represented domains actually respond. So that's really the substantive part of the conversation. It would be a presentation followed by discussion, how that relates to the work we're doing, and or project team formation or report out or ideation and brainstorming. And then a part of the meeting could be contributed to outreach, growth, and dissemination, conference participation, meetups, webinars, gallery, and some of the work we've done on our gallery, and some of the more administrative kinds of things around membership. How do we make the hub more effective? Should we be reviewing some of the conversations? and then of course some open conversations. So let me pause there before I get into sort of recommendations on some of the potential presentations, and open the floor up and kind of and ask you for your thoughts and responses to kind of this structure of how do we plan out meetings. What I'd love to do is have us have a calendar out for 4, 5, 6 weeks, so that people know what's coming and hopefully preparing and maybe reading articles ahead of time or engaging in some discussion pre or post. So I'm going to take a breath here and open the conversation up and see what folks think. This is the engagement part of the conversation.
Daniel, this is Pradeep. Thank you for sharing that. And I think the idea of having a calendar view for the next six weeks would be really helpful, so that we can stay focused and keep working on the targets, as well as also trying to think about where do we upload these documents, like whatever white papers or research articles that we come across. Will we have a common repository where we will upload those as well, so that the community can use them, so it can come of use to anyone in the community?
Great. So other thoughts? It would be great if you have other people kind of responding to that as well. I can certainly give you.
Well, I think that was a question, right? Do we have a place for people to post their resources and discuss them? Did I read that correctly? Is that the question?
Yeah. The second part is the question. Yes, you're correct.
Hello.
Yep. So
anybody home?
The answer is we do have
there you are.
The tool itself allows you to upload documents or put in
right.
We recognize that is limited. We also can post documents. And maybe I'll just go to the site and show you where that is, how that works. We can actually post particular documents. But what we recognized about a month ago was that we really do need a repository, and so we're in the process right now. And I don't know exactly when it's going to be available. I think within actually the next few weeks, where the platform provider is in the process of developing a custom sort of repository based on some of the best practices, so that for the Let's Get Technical group and any of the other groups, there'll actually be a repository that would allow us to put in the title, a short abstract, I believe, that and then a number of other sort of tags, meta tags, to be able to find that. So it'll be specific to the group. So that's actually underway, and ideally will be available pretty soon, and we'll hopefully have people who will want to participate in road testing that as we go forward.
It's worth saying that if you do have a resource, you don't have to wait weeks. I mean, we can post it for you, or you can post it, and certainly you can start a conversation around whatever the document is and provide a link. So please, if you want to engage people in something that you're working on or a resource that you found, you don't have to wait till we finish that technology for the repository.
And I'm just going to, right now on screen for folks, I'm going to the Let's Get Technical group, and to show you, for folks who are online here. So within the sort of the featured topics, there's ways that we can put up our hub manager can sort of post specific documents. That's one way. It's a little clunky right now. It's not totally accessible. But when we go into, for instance, our particular project, like what we've got here on the Let's Get Technical, you can post a comment very simply, and then you can also include a link to a document. The trick here is to make sure that it's clearly identified and articulated. And you'll see here as you go down, Eric had put in a number of links to documents here. and as well as I think Noam and Larry have put in other document listings here and links. So if you follow the post, you'll see a lot of the resources that are in fact available on site here. That's obviously not a particularly good way to create a repository for documents, having to sort of sort through that over time, which is what really has motivated us to create this larger repository that will hopefully serve our purposes and your purposes to find relevant documents and links, and that will be available to everybody to post information. The other thing I'll mention since I'm here is that we've now enabled the ability to do I'm afraid I just forgot the name of it, but you can respond to the individual post, and so it becomes a linked post. So it can have a specific conversation, kind of like on the Reddit format, where you can go down and respond to the publisher's comments, and then you can have other people respond to your comments. So it becomes a more threaded, that's the word I'm looking for, a more threaded conversation. And that capability is now embedded in the group here. So as you see, there's there's the identity proofing and patient matching group, and the comments are here and available. So let me pause for a second, and let me open it up again and actually encourage and invite you guys to sort of respond to, if this was kind of the orientation to an agenda, a simple yes, that sounds good, or yeah, I'm not sure about that. Been there, done that. What kind of response are you thinking about as you see this first part about the agenda structure here? Don't be bashful here.
This is Karen Smith. I think it looks good.
Thanks.
Ditto for Hudson.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Noam. I don't have any preference for this. Whatever moves the topic forward. Whatever we want. I don't care if it's structured or unstructured. Doesn't matter to me.
Ditto for me, Brian.
Brian, are you saying ditto in the sense of structured or unstructured, or?
I have no feeling one way or another. Whatever moves it forward. Whatever moves it forward.
Chavez here. Looks good. It would be helpful maybe to expand a little bit more on what governance means in the context as presented on the slide, but other than that, it looks good.
Great. Okay, so I get a sense that there are people who want more structure, and some folks are like, let's just get into the conversation and not worry about the process too much. And so we're kind of trying to accomplish both those things. So we can kind of shift focus for a bit. Some of the presentation, this is the part that I really want your feedback on as well. We've talked about this. There are a number of topics as we move forward on this that are unique to particular domains. And so would it be helpful to structure time to, for instance, talk about TEFCA, to go through the POC that Dave Walsh and a number of folks from the Medicaid TAC group actually held at the Medicaid conference. It was a great project. It was a great project bringing people together. There continues to be the NEAM and FIRE or NEAM on FIRE kind of conversation. There's things like the Family First Prevention Services Act, there's the Cures Act, and there's some other folks from particular Dave Ross from PHI is offered to talk about the Gates Global Health Initiative, which is dealing with interoperability in parts of the world that have much less infrastructure, but that there are lessons learned that are really interesting. Then, of course, there's other domains, what's going on in criminal justice, and the Fusion HIDA Centers, International Police, and then, of course, not of course, but other topics that we already have talked about some in other groups, like opioids, privacy, confidentiality, social determinants, and how much of that is interesting for people to hear about as we dive into some of the, sort of the technical aspects of it. Are the larger parts useful?
Daniel, this is Brian.
Yes.
I would suggest on the phrase NEAM/fire debate format should just be deleted. Just say NEAM on fire as the topic there. It was Dave Walsh's idea a while back, and I've been kicking it around with a lot of folks in the NEAM community. Lots of interest. I don't think this is a debate so much as something that we now have to prove will work.
That was meant to be provocative, Brian.
Sorry, I like moving beyond provocative as quickly as possible so that we can be productive. Provocative is rarely productive.
But it can be entertaining.
Daniel, I might add contemporary announcements from the prior meeting. I mean, for instance, 42 CFR Part 2 changes, the proposed rules just come out. I'd love the opportunity to real time, within 5 days of an announcement, have the opportunity to discuss it in this forum and get people's review and opinions.
Great.
I think that's a great idea.
Hi, this is Rita. I have a comment. Actually, since the gentleman just brought up 42 CFR Part 2, going back to what the other gentleman that was identifying the different things to include in approaching how to look at patient matching with regards to metrics and common definitions and those things. And I was thinking in the context of 42 CFR Part 2 and perhaps other things, what are potential barriers and enablers to doing things like person matching. And there's things that are specific to the health domain, but maybe there are things that may be different in other domains. I don't know what people think about that.
Just say a bit more about that. I'm thinking that it's an incredibly important topic, but flesh it out just a bit more.
Okay, so this is what I'm thinking. So data sharing can be a big challenge when for some things that relate to privacy. And Carmen Smiley, I know you're on the phone and you can chime in if you have thoughts about this. But this is just something that I'm thinking about. And sometimes in sort of the work that I've been involved with around patient matching, I mean, and in evaluating and responding to the initial RFI that OCR put out last year about, enablers and barriers to data sharing with regards to coordinating care and changing the rules that, that HIPAA is proposing. Sometimes there are things that relate to organizations maybe being reluctant to share information, and so that sometimes can affect whether you can even match a record. I mean, I don't know. Carmen, do you have thoughts about that?
This is Carmen. I'm sorry. I only caught the last part, but I think you're asking about, is it 42 CFR Part 2? It's related to consent and whether or not the patients are consenting to share their information?
So consent could be one way of looking at it, or one particular factor, or perhaps, maybe barrier or enabler. But I'm just thinking about, organizations that, for example, may not share certain information or may not, for example, respond to a query because, there may be potential concerns about maybe sharing certain types of data elements, whether there are particular demographics, that may be considered sensitive for some other things, and so that could have potentially affect matching.
Oh, definitely. And this is actually a really rich topic. I know this is way, way down in the weeds, and there's a million varieties. So I'll give you an example, at least, of what I'm thinking, and you can certainly tell me if I'm going down the right path. I worked for an HIE before, but the HIE spanned, of course, several states, and it was a pediatric HIE, but each state had different laws as to what information could be shared, and so we had to modify the settings behind the scenes to determine not only which records, but what information within each record. So we were tagging ICD-10s individually, and it just became this incredibly complex, setup where less information was shared in the end, but we had to conform to state law. Am I?
No, I think that's a great example, because that could also speak to, like, if there are particular data elements that may be considered valuable or relevant to patient matching but aren't shared, that could be something that could be considered like a barrier, you know what I mean?
Completely agree.
So just something to consider.
This is Marcelly. I think this is where we hit right in the bullseye as we solve this challenge of being able to identify what we have, why we have it, and where we got it, and if this is a pediatric patient or if it's a substance use or if it's mental health, what are the specific requirements? So one of the best outcomes from this group is to develop that matrix of rules on when this is allowed and when it's not. And it seems like it's only a fringe thing that some people deal with, but it becomes the root cause for trust and also the biggest business risk consistently over and over and over in every system. I've seen this I'm on the behavioral health board in Santa Clara County, and I chair the subcommittee on children, family, and adolescents. And this is not just a child issue. This ends up, the capacity to solve and resolve this sets the pattern that we also need for the other issues.
Totally agree.
Right, so saying that, I think we should add consent as its own line item.
Mm-hmm.
And trust, because they're really two different things.
Yes.
So maybe to add an additional, not to complicate things, but to sort of like add an additional like layer, you can look at it perhaps from like the perspective of like the patient, where the patient is the one that's kind of defining or controlling like what gets shared versus like what a provider or healthcare organization is willing to share. So maybe you want to just make that distinction between like the actors that we're talking about.
So are you referencing there from the patient perspective versus from the organizational perspective?
Yeah.
It also seems like there's a distinction between consent to share information from one person to another at one point in time and ongoing consent for that data to be used in any other way by any other parties, right? Consent doesn't seem like a binary issue. And my concern here, this doesn't seem like an edge case. We have a lot of instances right now in which I think local and state governments would reasonably claim that there's unlawful activity happening from other institutions that are part of this network that use NIC in terms of information sharing and actions that might intervene on the lives of vulnerable people. So this seems actually kind of core to the question of how to responsibly develop interoperability.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. It is absolutely critical. It is what shuts down everything. So we get these small pockets of things that work, but only in limited situations, and they never include substance use or mental health, and rarely pediatric for those reasons. So then it doesn't really work.
But I guess is the question how to like finagle the way beyond those concerns, or how to honor those concerns?
Oh, it's how to honor the concerns. If people know, I guess I'm an optimistic person, that if people know how to do something and they feel comfortable that it's allowed and it meets their responsibility and their requirements, then it can be done. In the county, what we run into are the huge challenges of, well, I'm not really sure it's allowed. It's really risky. I don't know if I have a way in my system to be able to identify, did the patient consent each time required for this one thing? Or if you don't want to use the word consent around rights of an organization, there still is this regular pattern of may I, and then it's can I, and then will I. It's this pattern that has to happen between, do you have the capacity, meaning the technical capacity? Do you also, is it allowed? Should you? Do you have the policy things figured out? And then if you have that figured out, do you have the consent? May you? And consent means by the patient or of the organization that must take an action. It's just a reoccurring pattern.
So I think to kind of like put a bow on this idea in the context of what I understand this project is trying to accomplish, is sort of like, in addition to figuring out like the matching like approaches and metrics and definitions and those things that are being discussed, also consider and include the policy, considerations that that Carmen also described.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there's, lots of pieces to, if you just pick person matching, I think a lot of these topics come up. What are the standards, that you'll ultimately use? The confidentiality and consent question always comes up. And I think that there's an ongoing need for further clarification, especially if we're talking across domains, outside of, just outside of a healthcare facility, for sharing back to the community or I'm sorry, to a community organization that's providing in-home services for mom who's just, given birth. There's a whole set of different concerns versus, child welfare needing to know about, potentially criminal justice or services that are being provided or other involvement in other programs. So it seems like and I'm not surprised that there would be a lot of interest in kind of going more deeply into that. I will point out that on the hub there was actually a specific group on confidentiality and privacy. There's a bunch of information there. But I think that one of the things that I'm noticing is that being able to bring this together in the context of these conversations seems to be a kind of a unifying practice. So the individual topics, whether or not social determinants or confidentiality or the technology, kind of all seem to be sort of converging here as we look at more concrete, specific things. So, and I think from the nature of the conversation, the contributions, that might be something that we actually highlight and maybe move that if we end up, doing some of these kinds of presentations or discussions. We might want to highlight that one earlier on since it's such a critical part of it. So I don't mean this list to be exhaustive, but there certainly are a number of topics that I think would benefit the group, both from an educational, cross-domain educational perspective, but also as we dive into the specific topics. So if there's, and I've tried to capture the ideas here as we've been talking contemporaneously. So if there's other ideas, feel free to sort of email or add them to it. We'll add this, of course, to the hub, and we can continue to build on this over time. So good. So I think we have a sense of what the agendas might look like. Kind of keep going where we've been at. So I'll focus on some particular topics, and I think as we go forward, we can look at, well, which are the ones that are most important, most critical to the projects we're working on, which have to happen upfront more immediately, and maybe consent is one of those. I would think from the non-healthcare side of things that the TEFCA, understanding that a little bit more in depth would be also quite relevant. And then vice versa, talking more about some of the human services legislation. Any last comments on this? I want to just move to the next slide then, which is this broader conversation. And we'll just spend a few minutes on this, and then we'll move into the overviews of the conferences. But this is a conversation, as we continually sort of think about and work on how to make this most effective and most useful. The conversation around governance always comes up. And so, how do we achieve our purpose to do that? How do we structure ourselves in a lateral way, right? We can continue to drive the conversations, as I said. But how do if our goal is to really drive cross-domain interoperability, what are the considerations? And all of you have been involved in these kinds of conversations, I'm sure, for many times, many ways. So are there things that jump out at you for how we can most effectively manage, operate this kind of virtual collaboration? And what was
so Dan Chavez here. I would add to this list, driving towards or converging on a common jargon. Even in the previous conversation that was just had with regards to consent and identity, we used a lot of different words that are overlapping, maybe synonymous, may not be, but I think in order for us to be successful, we must really drive towards a common jargon to the very best of our abilities, even though fully recognizing we're cross-domain. Noah Martz and I were in DC this week, and I know we joked a couple times in some of these presentations about new acronyms and overlapping acronyms and redundant acronyms. So I think one of the goals of this group is to really drive and converge on a common jargon.
This is Hudson Harris. Hi, Dan. I just want to echo what Dan said and just add in another piece is that we don't have to get everything exactly the same common jargon across. I've found that, working with establishing common definitions and jargons and what we're talking about, like even 80% or 70% can help get things a lot. I think a lot of times we tend to focus on the problem areas and not establishing all the common areas.
I'm just making a note of that, Hudson. I think we've all been in conversations around, say, what are the inhibitors and the barriers? I think a lot of that is well known. I think focusing on those common areas and successes, I would add, will also be not only positive but energizing for folks as we look at how to make progress on that.
It would be super helpful even to have them side by side where people can say, well, in this sector, I'm using these words to mean these concepts, where I totally agree with Dan that we get hung up on the words. And when it comes to pediatric patients, we get hung up because different states give different age groups of children under the age of 18, either a different right to determine care or a confidentiality that is different. So being able to even have a short summary of these unique components give us a much better 360 view of what are the things that we think about in advance. There may be just a few things that we think about in advance that makes people's life like Dan's so much easier if this other sector only knew to track this one thing or to identify.
This Adam, what that brings to mind is the real prospect, I think, that we can contribute to our respective areas by doing this. It's not just so we can talk to each other, but if our overarching goal is to have whole sectors talk to each other, then maybe we can start contributing some language, or I don't know what that looks like over time, but I think there can be a bigger purpose here than just to make it easier to understand each other on the call. Are you all in awe of what I just said, or are you all on mute?
This is Carmen Smiley. I'm in complete agreement on both of these. One of my pet peeves is that everybody uses terms that we sort of common jargon that mean nothing, especially when you get down to the metrics, which is another whole layer on top of this. We need to clearly define numerator and denominator and the population which we're targeting, which is just another dimension.
Great.
Eric here from Alexandria Consulting. Just on the topic of governance, I think another thing we have to lay out there, which may probably already be out there and I've just neglected to see it, but something related to like the provenance, the licensing of the work products of this group. If we put a lot of effort into it, can we access it? For example, the only reason this comes to mind is I tried to access an ISO document today and they wanted $200 just to download the PDF. And I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as how what this work will result in, as how available will it be and who can access it.
That's a great point. I think we should be very clear on that. And what I would declare is that it is open, especially given the nature of the original funder of the work is the foundation, and they're very clear that they're not claiming any IP rights to the work that we create on their behalf, and we certainly are not doing that. I'm wondering though if we might want to think more specifically about that, and I just spaced out the name of it, but the common license for reuse of it. So to recognize that there is a body of knowledge that's being created by a collaborative group, and that we are intending to share that specifically to avoid any uncertainty around that. And I forgot exactly what the name
Creative
of that.
Commons.
Creative Commons, yes.
Yep. There's Creative Commons. There's also open or open source.
That makes sense to folks? Or is that a relevant topic or relevant?
It's very relevant. Very relevant. I've done this before with organizations, and then the outcome of it becomes a paywall, privacy protected, lockdown. Yeah. Anyway, I think it's important.
Yep. Okay. Okay, so just a couple of the other things, we've talked about. I know there's certain folks that have expressed interest in, for instance, actually, and in a sense, we're doing this in a demonstration project or POC, but getting more specific on those kinds of things. In addition to, the work group products, the intellectual development of concepts or templates and things like that. Do folks weigh in either way on, do you see, again, it could be a subgroup, but the creation of or the focus of attention on specific demonstration projects, or is that outside of the domain of this kind of work? Is this more idea exchange, or is it inclusive of POCs?
This is Carmen Swan. I just want to add that there are opportunities for demonstration projects, and there are opportunities, even if it is not necessarily developing in Fire IG or something more technical, at least steps in the right direction. And perhaps that is a consensus document, and perhaps that is, crosswalking in the line of standards, or it'll come in many forms, but I think it would be very valuable.
Well, and I'll just add, Daniel, this is Dave Walsh. In another group that I work in, the Might Attack, we do a lot of that proof of concept implementation, and we'll talk about that in the context of the MES conference. But one of the things that we have found really valuable is it's a great educational process to be able to go through and say, oh, I've heard all those acronyms. Now this is what they mean, and here's how we implement them. So often people who are involved in that are involved in different levels. So some of the folks may be less technical and just following along, and then other people are actually building the proof of concept. I found it to be useful.
This is Brian Hanspicker. A long time ago, I was trained as a physicist, and proof of concepts are very similar to, if you will, proof of theories that you get from actually running a research project in the scientific world. And also very similar to the more contemporary approach of agile software, where if you have an idea, you write some code, you try it out, did it work? Great. Now you have another thing to check into your source code. If it didn't work, you learn something from it and you move on. So these proof of concept approaches are a great way to test out what can be very great ideas, but not necessarily fully understood ideas until you actually get the POC.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I think we can learn some from folks who have done this work in the past. I want to, unless there's any other additional comments on this governance conversation, which we can continue to refine and sort of articulate a little more effectively, from a sort of housekeeping perspective, what we'll do is we'll continue to sort of schedule the calls, moderate them, continue to sort of support these calls in the way possible. And I think that the frequency based on the attendance seems to be right. I know if we can gather people during the beautiful summer days on Friday afternoons, that there's some valuable content here. So I think the cadence of that is right. Obviously, we'll see over time, but we'll continue to schedule these except around major holidays or if there's something significant that's happening. And again, try to put out with enough advance notice the topics. And again, the part is in between meetings. Last thing I'll say about that, and then we'll move to the presentations, is that I often refer to this as the sort of in my mind, the sort of the Google 10%, right? How do we motivate folks, or how do we encourage, enable people who are working, particularly in the public sector, but also in private industry, to invest and to contribute or to carve out what it's not 10% necessarily, but even if it's 2% of time, if it's 10, 15 minutes a week or half an hour a week of adding a comment or adding to a conversation, that's the Pegasus. That's gonna create the continuity of this kind of work. If there's value to it, which clearly there seems to be, how do we do that? And that's going to come from a collaborative effort, so that that it's in a way almost a leaderless-led initiative. And I know everyone's really busy, and this, I'm hoping that this becomes part of people's sort of daily, weekly life, to make those contributions of posts, forums, or responses to things. And that gets we know there's a huge engagement on the other side. We know that there are people reading, since we put this up, over 70,000 page views on the hub, and there's, just the numbers are really encouraging. It's the active contribution to the content is something we need to kind of work on some more, and that involves all you folks. So with that, not surprisingly, we have a more limited time. If we're going to go to 1:30, we've got about 20 minutes there. So what I'd like to do is, as much as you can provide in sort of like a 5-minute overview, and we can come back to these if we so choose to go into some more detail. Like for instance, the presentation that Dave and Adam and other folks from Meditech did at Medicaid at MESC. Might be worthwhile to do in a larger forum. So with that, I think Paul had to drop off. I didn't put this in any particular order. There was an ONC meeting this week. Paul, I don't think you're there now. Dan, can you give us kind of some highlights of that, if you're willing to do that?
And if each person could keep to no more than 5 minutes, we should get each of us in before 1:30.
Right. No Mark's was there as well, so I welcome his input. A very robust meeting attended by 600-700 people in person and several hundred more online. Gave a great status of interoperability. I was impressed by the number of projects going on as it relates to interoperability, also blown away by the number of projects on interoperability. Some were, as going back to the jargon comment, some are very confusing, overlapping, redundant. Great work to Nick. I saw your logo on several project overview slides. Though it may be helpful for Nick to, in my humble opinion, list all the projects they're involved with, from Gravity to Paseo to a number of these things, and what the scope is. But a very good, robust meeting by the ONC. We reviewed the UK experience. I think the message here was, it takes a long time, be patient. It took them 15 years, and they covered some of their ups and downs and all arounds. The Netherlands, Great presentation by the FDA, as the FDA becomes much more open and API-based. But much of the same conversations that we're having in this forum were had in that one as it relates to patient identity, consent management, as well as just semantic interoperability. Noam, anything to add? You and I were in a lot of the same meetings. You could go to all the tracks. There were 5 different tracks, so it was impossible to be on top of everything. But I'll pause and either take questions or the live. Several follow-ups. I see more and more receptivity to NIM. So I think we should definitely pursue that. I've got some follow-up to do with some of you as it relates to NIM with Warmly for sure, with Tim Fletcher, et cetera.
I'll just chime in a bit. I guess I don't have much to add. I entered the meeting with fairly low expectations, and I'd say my expectations were met. I didn't hear all that much new on under the sun at this meeting. Much the same that I've heard for years. On the NIM side, Dan, I'd be very curious to know who's interested in NIM, because as you saw from a post I actually made on the NIC Hub, I had a discussion with a very senior former government official who has very strong feelings about NIM, and they're not particularly positive for a whole set of reasons, most of which having to do with the governance of NIM and what its real purpose is as a government interchange standard. But we can have that conversation separately. So I'm very curious, Dan, because I heard no discussion of NIM at this conference at all.
Okay.
Was this somebody from the government who was raising this annoyance about NIM, or was it from another agent, from outside of the government?
Formerly with the government and one of the most respected people in this domain.
Okay.
And I posted the essence of his comments last night on the NIC portal. So I love and encourage folks to look at that. And
I'll go and look at it.
Comment back.
Yeah, we will. Well, on that provocative note, who's up next?
Brian would be up next.
Great.
Excellent. Last week we had a NIM Health symposium in Roslyn, Virginia, at the Georgia Tech Research Institute. It was motivated by the fact that the ONC Federal Health Architecture Program is being sunsetted as of September 6th. And since FHA was funding the NIM Health Community of Interest, NIM Health is in danger of being shut down and archived. This symposium was intended to identify one or more agencies willing to continue the work of NIM Health. We had nowhere near as many people at our symposium as at the ONC meeting. We had 22 in person and 8 virtual participants, but they came as individual representatives of a number of federal agencies, state agencies, non-governmental organizations, and even a couple of vendors. It was led by Ryan Schultz, who's the director of the NIM Management Office, and myself as the NIM Health technical lead. We covered what is NIM, what is NIM Health, the new vision for NIM Health being covering the edge cases in between NIM domains and the clinical health domain, which we've already presented here a couple of times, I believe, to NIC LGT. And also started laying the groundwork for a series of NIEM health scenarios, which we've also touched upon here. Basically, various national disaster response scenarios, local emergency response scenarios, some medical record exchange scenarios, and substance abuse monitoring scenarios. We had presentations by Gene Hall from Kentucky, the state of Kentucky, who's also the executive director of the Prescription Monitoring Information Exchange. Chris Traver from HHS Agency for Children and Families on the use of NIEM for human services and associated healthcare information exchange. Dave Walsh, who gave a great speech on our discussion on both NIC and also the patient matching work that we started to do, plus the value of open RESTful APIs for NIEM, which basically led to his notion of the NIEM on FHIR, at least the NIEM over a FHIR-based protocol. Paul Warmelli kicked off the afternoon on the future of NIEM health governance. And that afternoon session quickly identified 6 different agencies, now in the aftermath of the symposium, 7 different federal agencies who were interested in progressing and supporting NIEM health, as well as one NGO that's interested in helping lead the work, as well as a vendor. The vendor, of course, being the organization I work for, Iris Health Solutions. The NIEM Management Office is continuing to drive the work behind the scenes with the stakeholders to finalize a funding and collaboration model. And that is my report.
And Brian, I think you posted the presentations on the Let's Get Technical.
Yes.
Yet? Okay.
Yes, they have been posted.
Yeah. So they're on there. There's a lot of slides, a lot of good information on there. Feel free to consume that, ask questions, and I guess one of the topics we can be checking in on periodically is how the transition is proceeding. Great, thanks. I think that's a nice overview there. Dan, I know you had talked about you had offered to talk about Chic as well. I don't know if there are other folks at Chic there as well that are on.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, there were several. It was very well attended. It was our 5th annual conference. I know Tim Fletcher was there. I'm not sure he's on the call. Seema Verma kicked us off with a keynote. Never had this level attendance before at Chic. Recognizing health information exchange as being a catalyst and a change agent for reform. Spoke to meaningful use in high tech and how well that did, and how she sees HIEs going forward being a real variable in reform and improvement going forward. We have about 75 HIEs. We just completed a nationwide survey of health information exchanges. That was published as part of the conference.
Hey, Dan.
92%. Yes.
One quick question. I should have asked everyone to do this. Could you just, in just a few words, just explain Chic for folks who are not familiar with it?
Sure, happy to. So Chic is the Health Information Exchange Industry Association. It is the membership of the 75 or so HIEs across the country. We come together to share, to collaborate, to learn from each other. It's a terrific conference. It's about 650 were in attendance, including vendors. Half of those were vendors, as you might expect, but the trade show is managed in a very sharing manner, if you will. It's not just about sales. It's all about what we can learn from each other and pass on to reduce our cost of implementation and have maximum impact to the quintuple aim. But that we released a survey where our membership of HIEs serves 92% of the U.S. population. And so I would encourage you to download that survey and now figure out all the things that we do in terms of real-time notifications, sharing of medical records, and the like. Once that presentation, the PowerPoint is completed in terms of summarizing that presentation, I'll distribute it to this group. Again, very good meeting, a very active membership in Health Information Exchange. I would encourage you all to get involved with your local health information exchanges. Good representation by the national exchanges as well, whether it be eHealth Exchange, Sequoia Project, Care Quality, Commonwealth, Direct Trust, Karen Alliance, all were in attendance as it relates to Health Information Exchange. As you might expect, a little biased towards San Diego, but some great work going on in San Antonio, in Oklahoma, as it relates to the sharing of the social determinants of health. So without question, health information exchanges across the country have core competencies, and it's just great to learn what other folks are doing above and beyond what your community is doing, what you can learn, what you can copy, what you can emulate, and bring home to your local exchange. We get happy to entertain questions. I don't know if Tim's on the line, wants to comment.
One question, you just mentioned both Oklahoma and San Antonio had some good examples of data sharing. So I'm assuming that's with social determinants. I'm assuming, and one question which it would be really interesting to pursue later is, how can or do HIEs support the data exchange, since it's already the highway that's been built in a lot of places, if you're reaching 92% of the population, can HIEs actually share information across and with other domains to use that same highway analogy?
The answer is yes. It depends on the workflow, or it depends on geography. It's not uniform across the country.
Okay.
So I want to, Daniel, I apologize for interrupting. We have 4 minutes for anybody who's got a hard stop at 1:30, and that includes me, with apologies. So it may be jump to Dave for a quick MESC, and I'll add anything that we need to add.
Yep, Dave, would you go ahead? I think I have a slide of yours here.
Sure. So the MESC conference stands for the Medicaid Enterprise Systems Conference. I've been going to that for 20 plus years at this point. It's held in different cities or different states every year. It's primarily state Medicaid vendors, CMS, and the whole vendor community that supports Medicaid. The Might Attack, which I chair, is a group that does proof of concepts. We actually implement some of the hot topics of the day and then demonstrate it. My particular focus there is consumer engagement and based on fire services. The demonstration this year was a sequel to last year's, where we used a fire-based care management solution to treat an opioid addict and her son, who eventually got into her prescriptions and so forth and became an issue as well. It was a good presentation in that we had one individual who really understood the CMS proposed rules that are due later this year and give us an overview of that. Somebody, Matt Engelhardt from MyHIN, from the Michigan Health Information Network, talked more technically specific about what FHIR is and how it works. Then we had 3 people that gave a demonstration of that care management solution built on FHIR. Then we had a gentleman from Vermont who talked about technologies that were up and coming, newer technologies. And then Adam and I worked on Daniel's presentation to communicate fundamentally what let's get technical was, what the NIC was, and then towards the end, we talked about a commitment, and it truly is a commitment for us to work more closely together as we go forward. Just an add-on to that, the MyHIN people, the Michigan Health Information Network, have afforded us a FHIR domain for us to be able to build our proof of concepts on. So again, it's that level of collaboration. Mississippi reached out to us and said, hey, we've got a FHIR server here. We want somebody to start to work with to be able to demonstrate the art of the possible there. Just one more point that I'd like to make, because I know we're short on time. One of the aha moments that I had at the conference related to identity matching. And on this picture, we can see the future of both healthcare and human services, in my opinion, which is going to be a series of servers that are going to be making information available and ingesting information. A lot of that is going to be FHIR based. Certainly some of it is going to be human services based. And what I hope to bring to this party is successes in the healthcare space that we can bring to human services. But the aha moment for me had to do with identity or cross-domain identity matching. As we look at hundreds or thousands of these services up there to be able to deliver information or ingest information, the problem is going to change from one identity matching solution per domain to something that can be shared across domains. And that's a more challenging problem, I would say. It really just came into focus for me. Paul Wormelli forwarded me a document, which I'm sure we're going to post on the hub, has to do with Sequoia. It's a good paper on cross-domain identity matching. So there's a lot to learn there. And again, like I said earlier, I'm a big proponent of proof of concept implementation, so you can really learn what the details are. So that's it for me, Daniel.
Thanks, Dave. And I'm going to jump in because I do have to, I'm a little late for an appointment, but I do want to just jump in for a minute. And Daniel was there with me, or I was there with him, so he can finish up anything I don't touch on. Mainly, I just want to suggest to the group that you take a look at the murals, the mural gallery that we have on our website. It's both on our site for NIC and the Stewards of Change Institute site. Well worth taking a look. It is where my cell phone just picked me up and started typing a text. I wonder to whom. So Daniel and I were presenting the gallery to the people there. We curated several murals, a handful of murals that were relevant to the Medicaid audience, social determinants and others. And initially we were placed sort of in the hinterlands. We did not get good placement, but they moved us, they saw that, and they moved us. And we got a good, not only good traffic, but really sort of high-end state officials who were as impressed by the, I don't know how else to put it, impressed by the gallery and its content as were attendees at the previous conference at which we showed 30 of these things. And so it's a very strong response. I think it's worth everybody looking because there's so much good content there that I honestly think that many of you could use it. Could see which murals in what context could be used to illustrate your work, to further your work, to talk to colleagues about your work. There's really strong, especially if you're a visual learner, there's just really strong content there. And so that's where I spent most of my time at the MESC conference, and I do urge people to take a look if you haven't already.
Well, I would add to what Adam had to say that we put one of those murals in as a backdrop to the Might Attack group there. And it was a tremendous conversation starter. You know, first it was visually appealing, so people had an interest in it, but then you could engage in a conversation about the integration of human services and so forth. So it worked really well in the booth.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah. Okay, thanks everyone. I got to sign off. Have a great weekend. Bye, all.
So we can also add that to one of the topics. I think it's interesting if folks who haven't seen it as a way to communicate a lot of these complex ideas. And there's been a lot of interest from other conferences, which we expect to be showing the gallery at over the next year or so. So with that, I'm glad we got through everything. It was a little quick on the end there. We can come back to any or all of these presentations and discussions as appropriate. I put some of the links and some of the other information right in the slide, and we'll post this with some other notes over the next couple of days. So feel free to engage on this, and if you have any challenges, questions, recommendations, you know where to find us. And we'll see you back here next Friday. Please invite other folks who think would be relevant or find value in the conversation, and we'll just continue to march forward on this. So thanks everyone for your participation, and as Adam said, have a great weekend. See you soon.
Thank you, Daniel.
Bye everybody.
Bye everybody.
Thank you.
So long.